She lived a life that seemed ordinary to everyone who crossed her path. She woke up early, made her own breakfast, and went to work at a small office downtown. Her clothes were simple, her hair often tied in a neat bun, and her manner was quiet and unassuming. People rarely noticed her, and that was how she liked it. She didn't want attention or praise. She had learned long ago that the world valued appearances more than truth. She had something the world could never see, but she had kept it secret for reasons only she understood. Her husband, on the other hand, was the opposite. He walked into rooms with a confident stride, always dressed sharply, always talking loudly, always making sure everyone knew about his achievements. He was proud of what he had built and was certain that he was the one holding all the power in the relationship. To him, she seemed like someone who would never understand the complexities of success. He often teased her gently at first, then more openly, calling her naive and dismissive names when they were alone. He never imagined that she could have something he could not measure or touch. Despite his teasing, she rarely reacted. She would smile politely, nod, and carry on with her own tasks. She had learned the art of silence from her parents, who had always valued thoughtfulness over words. People often assumed she was weak or uninvolved, but that was a mistake they made at their own peril. She had grown up in a household where power was subtle, where decisions were made behind closed doors, and where every action was carefully considered. The world had changed her parents' empire into a quiet legacy, one that no one outside the family really understood. Years ago, her parents had built a massive business empire. It spanned multiple industries and even crossed international borders. When they passed away, they had left detailed instructions for their fortune. It was not hers to use recklessly, and she had always followed their guidance. A professional team managed the assets, ensuring everything grew steadily. She had inherited the controlling rights, but she had never flaunted it. To her, wealth was a tool, not a trophy. She did not need to show it off to prove her worth. Her husband believed he was marrying someone ordinary, someone who would follow his lead in every aspect of life. He did not see the intelligence, the patience, and the quiet strength she possessed. He thought her modesty was a lack of ambition. In his eyes, her calm and gentle manner were signs of weakness. He often spoke about her in ways he thought no one could hear. He laughed about her clothes, her habits, her lack of interest in social events. He shared these thoughts with his friends, proudly showing how he thought he had married someone simple. At first, she had tried to reason with him. She had tried to engage in conversations about the future, about plans, about decisions that mattered to both of them. But each time he brushed her off, convinced that his ideas were superior. Over time, she realized that arguing was pointless. He would not listen, and any attempt to explain herself only frustrated him more. So she learned to step back, to let him speak, and to act only when necessary. Silence became her shield. Her days were filled with ordinary routines, yet they were rich with small, meaningful moments. She enjoyed reading letters from old friends, taking walks in quiet parks, and listening to music that spoke to her soul. She had friends who respected her for who she was, though few truly understood the depth of her life. She found joy in simple things, and she had a remarkable ability to stay calm, even when surrounded by chaos. Her husband never understood why she did not crave attention, why she did not seek validation. To him, the world revolved around status and recognition, and she did not play the game. Despite the distance growing between them, she never stopped caring about the man she had married. She remembered the early days, when he had been kind and full of dreams. She had seen the man he could be, and she had hoped that time would help him remember that version of himself. She still respected him, even when he mocked her, even when he acted as if she were nothing. She believed that people change, that patience can sometimes awaken understanding, and that dignity matters more than proving a point. He, however, had changed. Success had transformed him into someone proud and impatient. He surrounded himself with people who mirrored his beliefs, people who admired his confidence and reinforced his ideas. He no longer noticed the quiet strength in his wife. He no longer saw that the woman he married had an inner power far beyond what he could measure. To him, she was invisible, a shadow in the life he was building for himself. He mocked her openly in conversations with friends, proud of his own cleverness, unaware of the truth that lay beneath her calm exterior. On one ordinary morning, as she prepared breakfast, she reflected on their marriage. She thought about the small arguments that had grown into wide chasms of misunderstanding. She thought about the years she had spent trying to connect, trying to be seen, and trying to be valued. She realized that no matter what she did, he would never recognize her for who she truly was. And yet, she did not feel anger. She felt a quiet sadness, a gentle disappointment, and a resolve to remain true to herself. Her husband entered the kitchen, wearing a suit and a grin that he thought exuded superiority. He made a sarcastic remark about her simple breakfast, laughing as if she would be embarrassed. She smiled politely, poured him a cup of coffee, and said nothing. In that moment, she understood that words were not the tools she needed. The truth, she knew, would reveal itself in its own time. As she left for work, she passed by her home office, where a small box of legal documents sat locked away. Inside were records of her inheritance, of trusts, of company shares, all carefully maintained and untouched. She had never shown them to her husband. She had never needed to. The power contained in those papers was hers alone, and she had no desire to wield it recklessly. She carried it quietly, like a seed waiting to bloom when the time was right. At work, she continued her day as usual. Colleagues appreciated her dedication and calm demeanor. Clients trusted her advice and insights, though few understood the depth of her experience. She handled every task with grace, patience, and intelligence. Her life seemed ordinary, but beneath the surface, she held a world of influence that no one around her could imagine. Her husband, meanwhile, spent the day building his empire in his own way. He attended meetings, made deals, and boasted to his peers. He remained completely unaware that the person he had dismissed and mocked carried a fortune far beyond his comprehension. In his mind, he was the one with control, the one who held all the power, the one who dictated the direction of their shared life. That evening, they sat across from each other at the dinner table. He talked about his plans, his ambitions, and his expectations. She listened quietly, nodding politely, responding only when necessary. There was no anger, no sarcasm, no attempt to prove him wrong. She simply existed in her truth, calm and composed, carrying a secret strength that he could not see. In her mind, she knew that life has a way of teaching lessons to those who underestimate others. She knew that the world often judges based on appearances, on loud voices, on gestures of power. But she also knew that true influence does not need to be displayed. It is quiet, steadfast, and enduring. She had lived by this principle all her life, and it had served her well. As the night drew on, she prepared for bed, reflecting on the ordinary moments that made up her life. She thought about the simplicity she cherished, the dignity she maintained, and the quiet power she carried. She understood that her husband's mockery and arrogance were temporary, that his perception of her was flawed, and that the truth would one day speak for itself. Little did he know that the very life he believed was insignificant held the key to unimaginable wealth and influence. Little did he know that the woman he mocked would one day reveal a reality that would completely change his understanding of power. For now, she rested peacefully, confident in the knowledge that patience, dignity, and quiet strength often carry more weight than pride, arrogance, and loud displays of authority. And in that ordinary evening, in a simple home, the stage was set for a revelation that no one could have predicted. As the days passed, the distance between them grew more noticeable. They lived under the same roof, yet their worlds were separate. She moved through the house quietly, preparing meals, keeping things organized, and tending to small tasks that seemed ordinary but kept their home functioning. He, on the other hand, immersed himself in work and social events, constantly seeking validation from people outside their home. He wanted admiration, attention, and the feeling of being powerful. He assumed she would always be behind him, unnoticed, unimportant, and easy to overlook. It started with small remarks at breakfast and dinner. He would laugh at the way she chose to dress, or the books she liked to read, or the way she preferred quiet walks over lavish parties. At first, she had tried to respond with gentle words, explaining why she liked simplicity, why her choices mattered to her, and why she felt fulfilled without seeking recognition. But his laughter drowned out her explanations. He could not understand, and he refused to see her world. Her friends began to notice the change in her. They saw the subtle sadness in her eyes, the careful restraint in her voice, and the way she stopped sharing her thoughts freely. They offered support, advice, and warnings, suggesting she stand up for herself, that she demand respect, that she confront her husband's mockery. She listened politely, thanked them for their concern, but she did not act on it. She understood something they did not. Her power was quiet, invisible, and deliberate. It did not need to be displayed for others to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, her husband grew bolder in his remarks. He began openly criticizing her in front of mutual acquaintances, commenting on how she did not understand the world of money, how she was holding him back, how she was naive and simple-minded. He had convinced himself that she had no assets, no influence, and no ability to challenge him in any way. His confidence made him careless, and he shared his opinions with anyone willing to listen. He was certain that the marriage was his stage, that he was the central figure, and that she was merely a supporting character. Despite the growing tension, she maintained her calm. She did not argue, she did not insult, she did not make dramatic gestures. Instead, she continued to live in her world of quiet strength. She focused on her work, her hobbies, and the small routines that brought her peace. She found solace in knowing that her worth was not determined by someone else's opinion. Every decision she had ever made had been intentional, guided by reason, patience, and foresight. Her husband's behavior became more aggressive over time. He started making plans to separate, convinced that he was the one carrying the household, the career, and the social life. He believed the divorce would be simple. In his mind, she had nothing to claim, no influence, no leverage. He imagined that she would walk away with minimal support and that he would continue his life without any obstacle. He felt confident, almost smug, thinking he had outsmarted her completely. During this time, she quietly reviewed her own life. She reflected on the years she had spent with him, the times she had offered support, and the moments she had remained silent when words might have escalated conflict. She knew that the real value of her life was not in being seen or praised, but in the decisions she had made and the control she had over her own world. Her parents had taught her that true power often goes unnoticed until the right moment. She had lived by that lesson every day. In public, she was still polite, kind, and composed. She smiled at neighbors, greeted colleagues warmly, and helped friends whenever she could. To the outside world, she was still the same gentle, ordinary woman, the one who seemed easy to underestimate. But her husband, blinded by arrogance, failed to see the quiet preparation that had been ongoing for years. He believed he had the upper hand, unaware that his assumptions were dangerously incomplete. Her husband's confidence extended to financial matters. He spoke openly about investments, about plans for the future, and about how the house and lifestyle would remain in his control. He consulted with friends, advisors, and acquaintances, sharing his intentions as if victory was already guaranteed. He did not consider that she might have resources of her own, resources that had been carefully preserved, legally protected, and beyond his knowledge. In his mind, she had no leverage. One evening, during a heated conversation about the future, he made a comment he thought would wound her. He said that she would never understand the responsibilities of managing wealth, and that she would be lucky to maintain even a modest portion of what he had earned. She listened quietly, her face calm, her voice soft, and simply nodded. She did not respond with anger. Instead, she allowed him to reveal the depth of his misunderstanding. She had learned long ago that arrogance often exposes itself when people believe they are in complete control. As the tension grew, she began to prepare herself mentally for what was to come. She knew that divorce might be inevitable, and she understood the importance of being calm, prepared, and strategic. Unlike her husband, she was not acting impulsively. She was aware of the legal and financial structures surrounding her life, of the trust that had been established by her parents, and of the potential consequences for anyone who underestimated her. She did not need to reveal her knowledge prematurely. She waited, as she always had, for the right time. Her days became a balance of ordinary routine and quiet vigilance. She went to work, completed her tasks with care, and returned home to maintain the household. She continued to observe her husband, noting his behavior, his assumptions, and his growing frustration. She understood that he would continue to underestimate her until reality forced him to see the truth. And she knew that when that moment came, it would change everything. During this period, friends and acquaintances began to notice the strain in their marriage. Some offered advice, suggesting that she demand her rights, confront her husband, or take legal action. She listened, but she remained calm and unshaken. She had no need to act hastily. Her life was structured in such a way that she held a position of quiet strength, one that did not require confrontation to maintain. She had inherited patience and foresight, and she would use them wisely. Her husband, meanwhile, continued his life believing that he was untouchable. He planned vacations, investments, and business ventures with the assumption that the divorce, if it happened, would be favorable to him. He did not suspect that the very woman he dismissed held a power far greater than he could imagine. Every laugh, every sarcastic remark, and every dismissive comment made him feel confident, blind to the reality of her situation. In moments of solitude, she reflected on the lessons she had learned from her parents. They had taught her that wealth is not just money, but influence, knowledge, and timing. They had shown her that true power often remains unseen until revealed at the right moment. She carried these lessons with her every day, silently preparing for a future where her calm, patience, and insight would prove far stronger than arrogance or mockery. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional distance between them became more pronounced. She no longer attempted to engage in arguments, no longer sought recognition, and no longer hoped that he would change. She focused instead on living with integrity, dignity, and quiet strength. She knew that the world often misjudges people based on appearances, but she also knew that truth has a way of surfacing when the time is right. One evening, as they sat in their living room, he spoke about his plans for the next year. He mentioned investments, vacations, and new opportunities, speaking with a tone of certainty that only increased his arrogance. She listened, sipping her tea, her expression calm and composed. She did not interrupt. She did not question. She did not reveal anything. She understood that patience was her ally, and that the right moment would come for her to demonstrate the reality of her life. In that ordinary evening, with the house quiet and the day ending, the subtle battle between appearances and reality continued. She maintained her routine, her dignity, and her composure, carrying with her a secret that her husband could never have imagined. He remained confident, unaware, and entirely convinced of his superiority, blind to the truth that she had always known. She went to bed that night with a sense of calm. The world outside might see her as ordinary, simple, and unremarkable. Her husband might continue to mock, dismiss, and underestimate her. But she knew the truth of her life, the strength of her character, and the power she quietly held. The days of underestimation were numbered, and when the time came, reality would reveal what arrogance could not foresee. For now, she rested in her quiet strength, waiting patiently for the moment when the world, and her husband, would finally understand that she had always been in control. The day the divorce papers were finally served, he believed it would be the simplest thing he had ever done. He expected her to be overwhelmed, quiet, and powerless. He had already imagined the freedom he would enjoy once she was out of the picture, thinking about the lifestyle he would continue to build for himself. He thought of it as a formality, a step that would confirm his position of control. What he did not know was that the moment he believed he had power, reality was about to surprise him. Her first meeting with the lawyer was calm. She carried herself with grace and quiet authority, discussing the process without emotion or haste. She did not need to show strength because she already had it. The lawyer explained the usual procedure, assuming she was like any ordinary client, someone with little to claim and little influence. She listened carefully, nodding politely, but there was an air of confidence about her that seemed to make the lawyer pause subtly. She did not reveal much, only asked the right questions, and remained composed in a way that was rare for someone in her position. Her husband was so confident he did not even attend the first meeting. He had assumed the outcome, assuming she would accept whatever he decided to give her. He imagined her sitting at a small table with the lawyer, meek and obedient, ready to sign whatever documents were presented. He felt victorious before the process even began. He could not have been more wrong. The lawyer began reviewing financial records, company holdings, and legal documents connected to her life. At first, it seemed like routine work, the usual examination of accounts and property. But as the pages turned, the lawyer's expression changed. The documents were not what they expected. They were complex, detailed, and linked to entities far beyond a simple bank account or a personal savings plan. They reflected ownership, control, and legal rights that had been carefully structured to ensure the preservation of a significant fortune. Her husband had never bothered to ask questions about her background. He had assumed she had no knowledge of business, no assets to speak of, and no understanding of legal complexities. He had mocked her for years, confident in his own superiority. He had laughed at her simplicity, thinking she was incapable of grasping financial matters. But the papers revealed something entirely different. The lawyer paused, scanning through the records again. There were company trusts, international investments, and legal agreements that gave her control over billions of dollars in assets. These were not minor holdings. They were major business interests, companies that operated across continents, and funds that influenced markets. For years, she had been the controlling beneficiary of a vast empire, quietly managing the legacy left to her by her parents. She had never flaunted it, never mentioned it, and had maintained the trust as a private responsibility. As the realization sank in, the lawyer began explaining the situation to her. Every word they exchanged was measured, calm, and precise. She listened attentively, confirming the details when necessary, but her demeanor remained composed. She had known all of this for years, yet she understood the importance of clarity and legal procedure. She was aware that her husband's ignorance of these facts gave her a strategic advantage, but she did not let that guide her emotions. She remained in control, quietly confident, patient, and deliberate. Meanwhile, her husband began noticing subtle changes. He received messages from his own lawyer, updates about the financial review, and hints of documents that did not match his expectations. At first, he dismissed them, thinking they were minor complications or misunderstandings. He assumed he could resolve them easily, that the divorce would proceed as planned. His pride blinded him to the possibility that he had been entirely misled by appearances. When the truth became undeniable, his confidence faltered. He was shocked to discover that the woman he had ridiculed for years, the woman he had assumed was powerless, controlled resources beyond his comprehension. The empire he thought he had built and sustained independently was, in part, influenced by her holdings. It was a moment of humiliation that he had never anticipated, a realization that left him unsure of his next step. She remained calm throughout the revelation. She did not gloat, she did not ridicule, and she did not seek revenge. She allowed the facts to speak for themselves. The lawyers discussed options, legal strategies, and implications, but she approached everything with quiet confidence. She understood that wealth and power were tools, not weapons, and that timing and patience often outweighed immediate action or confrontation. Her husband tried to act quickly, attempting to understand the extent of her holdings. He asked questions, reviewed documents, and sought advice. But every answer only confirmed what he feared. She had been in control the entire time. Every assumption he had made about her simplicity, her lack of ambition, and her inability to handle complex matters was completely false. He had underestimated her, mocked her, and dismissed her for years, never realizing the quiet power she carried. Friends and acquaintances who had witnessed their marriage were equally shocked. They had always seen her as gentle, ordinary, and unremarkable. The revelation of her true financial influence changed the perception of everyone who knew them. People began to understand that appearances can be deceiving, that quiet dignity can conceal immense strength, and that arrogance often blinds people to reality. Despite the shock around her, she maintained her composure. She met with her husband calmly, discussing the divorce with measured words. She did not raise her voice or act emotionally. She simply stated the facts, acknowledged the legal reality, and continued with the process. Her patience and calmness contrasted sharply with his nervousness, uncertainty, and sudden humility. The divorce process took on a new dynamic. What had seemed straightforward now required careful negotiation, legal reviews, and strategic discussions. She had the advantage not because she sought it aggressively, but because she had quietly preserved her rights and maintained control over her own life. Her husband, once confident and mocking, now faced the consequences of his assumptions and arrogance. Every meeting, every document review, and every legal discussion reminded him of the reality he had ignored. He realized that his previous actions, mockery, sarcasm, and dismissive behavior, had been directed at someone far more capable and intelligent than he had ever imagined. It was a humbling experience, one that forced him to confront his own misunderstandings and misjudgments. She, on the other hand, continued her life with calm grace. She managed the emotional challenges of the situation quietly, ensuring that her focus remained on the facts, not on the drama. She understood the importance of clarity, of patience, and of maintaining dignity. She knew that rushing or reacting emotionally would not serve her. Instead, she allowed the truth to reveal itself naturally, knowing that reality would be undeniable and respected by everyone involved. During this time, she reflected on the lessons her parents had taught her. They had always emphasized discretion, careful management, and patience. They had warned her that the world often misunderstands quiet people, that true power is often invisible, and that patience can be more valuable than confrontation. She applied these lessons daily, remaining composed even when the world around her was surprised, confused, or judgmental. Her husband, meanwhile, struggled to adjust. He had believed he was untouchable, that his confidence and status placed him above any challenges. The revelation of her fortune shook his assumptions, forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about their relationship and her capabilities. He realized that he had been blind, arrogant, and dismissive, and that his behavior had been both unjust and short-sighted. As the divorce continued, she maintained her focus, ensuring that all legal procedures were followed and that her rights were fully respected. She did not use her wealth to intimidate or manipulate, nor did she flaunt it unnecessarily. Her power was quiet, deliberate, and disciplined, a reflection of her upbringing and the values instilled in her by her parents. By the time the divorce was approaching its later stages, the reality was clear to everyone involved. The woman he had mocked for years was far from powerless. She had quietly maintained control over a vast fortune, managed complex legal and financial structures, and approached every challenge with patience and dignity. Her husband, once confident in his superiority, now faced the humbling truth that he had underestimated her completely. Throughout the process, she remained calm and composed. She did not gloat, she did not argue unnecessarily, and she did not seek revenge. Instead, she continued to live her life with quiet strength, demonstrating that true power is often unseen, measured by patience, understanding, and the ability to act with integrity when the time is right. By the end of this stage, the first major shock had settled. Her husband had begun to understand, at least partially, the consequences of underestimating someone based on appearances. The world had taken notice as well, witnessing a woman whose quiet demeanor had concealed a fortune and a level of influence that few could imagine. The story was no longer about mockery or arrogance. It had become a lesson in humility, patience, and the invisible strength that often lies within the quietest people. She continued her life with poise, moving forward without bitterness, anger, or the need to prove herself. Her quiet confidence, the discipline instilled by her parents, and the knowledge of her own power allowed her to navigate the legal and emotional challenges with grace. Every step she took reinforced the truth that appearances can be deceiving, and that real strength often lies in patience, dignity, and the careful preservation of one's rights and integrity. In the end, the truth was undeniable. The woman he had ridiculed, dismissed, and underestimated held a position of extraordinary influence and control. She had always known it, but she allowed time and circumstance to reveal it to the world. The discovery of her fortune had changed everything. Her husband, who had once been confident and mocking, now approached every conversation with hesitation. He was no longer sure of his footing, no longer convinced of his superiority, and increasingly aware that he had misjudged her completely. The woman he had underestimated for years remained calm, composed, and fully in control, a presence that made his uncertainty more pronounced. She did not flaunt her wealth or her control. She allowed the legal process to unfold naturally, letting the facts speak for themselves. Her quiet demeanor and steady approach only highlighted the contrast between her calm authority and his growing anxiety. Every meeting with lawyers, every document review, and every discussion about property and assets reinforced the truth he had failed to see. She had been in control all along. Her husband tried to recover some confidence, believing that he could navigate the situation through negotiation and persuasion. He sought advice, tried to understand the details of her holdings, and even attempted to assert influence over some aspects of the divorce. But every step he took only confirmed her careful planning and control. He realized, slowly and painfully, that his assumptions about her simplicity and naivety were entirely wrong. The legal team handling the divorce was equally impressed by the structure and scale of her holdings. She had inherited not only money but also complex corporate structures, trusts, and international investments. Every document, every agreement, and every company had been carefully managed and legally protected. It was clear that she had always had the power to shape outcomes and influence decisions. Her husband's ignorance had left him unprepared and vulnerable, but she remained composed, showing that true strength does not require display. Friends and family began to notice the shift as well. Those who had once believed she was ordinary were stunned by the scale of her control. They realized that appearances had been deceiving and that quiet dignity often hides incredible capability. People who knew her began to admire her patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking. She had never sought recognition, yet the truth was impossible to ignore. At home, the tension was palpable. Her husband, once domineering and mocking, now spoke cautiously, measured his words, and hesitated to act without understanding the full scope of her power. The roles had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Where he had once held all the confidence, she now exuded authority without even trying. Her presence alone commanded respect, a reminder of the lessons he had ignored for years. She continued her daily routines with grace. She went to work, engaged with friends, and maintained her home, all while carrying the quiet confidence that only comes from knowing your own worth. Every action was deliberate, every decision thoughtful. She did not need to assert power aggressively because she had always had it. Her calm demeanor, coupled with her strategic understanding of her assets and rights, created a balance that her husband could not disrupt. In public, she remained the same kind, gentle, and composed woman. She did not boast or seek attention. Yet those who saw the unfolding divorce process understood that she was far more capable than anyone had imagined. The contrast between her quiet authority and her husband's sudden uncertainty was striking. It became a story not of wealth alone but of dignity, patience, and intelligence that had gone unnoticed for too long. The more her husband tried to assert control, the more apparent it became that he was outmatched. Every argument, every negotiation, every attempt to challenge her position revealed the careful planning and foresight she had exercised for years. He realized that his previous mockery and dismissal were not just mistakes. They had been complete misjudgments of someone far more capable than he had ever imagined. Her lawyers explained every detail to him, patiently, clearly, and without exaggeration. She listened but remained largely silent, letting the facts and the legal realities demonstrate her position. Her approach was not confrontational. It was deliberate, disciplined, and respectful of the process. She had no need to humiliate or belittle him. The truth was sufficient, and it spoke louder than any words could. As the legal proceedings continued, her husband began to accept his new reality. He understood that he had underestimated her, that he had mocked someone whose influence and control were far greater than he had imagined. He had assumed superiority based on appearances, arrogance, and pride, only to discover that the woman he dismissed had quietly held all the power. Her calmness extended beyond legal matters. She continued to manage her household, her work, and her personal life with the same quiet efficiency she had always demonstrated. She did not allow the stress of the divorce to affect her demeanor. She maintained her health, her routines, and her composure, showing that true strength comes from consistency and self-assurance, not from outward displays of dominance. The contrast between her patience and his growing anxiety became a lesson in humility for him. He began to reflect on his behavior, recognizing the arrogance that had guided him for years. The mockery, the dismissiveness, the assumptions, all of it had blinded him to the truth. He had treated her as powerless, only to discover that he had been the one out of his depth. During this period, she also reflected on her own journey. She thought about the lessons from her parents, the years of careful management, and the quiet choices she had made to preserve her rights and her influence. She realized that patience, dignity, and strategic thinking had allowed her to navigate challenges without confrontation. Her calm approach was not weakness. It was deliberate strength, the kind that does not need validation from anyone. Friends and colleagues who observed her composure began to share their admiration. They noticed that she remained polite, thoughtful, and dignified even in difficult circumstances. They saw that her strength was not loud or boastful but inherent, a result of careful preparation and self-confidence. People began to understand that the power she held was not just financial but personal, rooted in intelligence, patience, and integrity. Her husband, increasingly aware of his mistakes, tried to make amends in small ways. He attempted to show respect, to acknowledge her knowledge, and to correct his past assumptions. But some lessons come too late. She accepted civility and understanding but made it clear that respect could not be retroactive. The years of mockery and underestimation had left their mark, and he had to face the consequences of his actions. Throughout all of this, she maintained a balance between her personal life and the legal proceedings. She continued to work, socialize, and enjoy her hobbies, demonstrating that her life was not defined solely by conflict. She had control over her own narrative, and she did not allow the divorce to dominate her existence. Her calmness and self-assurance highlighted the contrast between her quiet strength and her husband's reactive anxiety. The legal team continued to guide her carefully, but she remained an active participant in every decision. She reviewed documents, asked questions, and ensured that every aspect of her holdings and rights was protected. She did not act impulsively or emotionally. Instead, she relied on preparation, knowledge, and foresight. Her husband watched in quiet disbelief as the woman he had dismissed demonstrated authority, competence, and confidence at every step. Eventually, it became clear that the balance of power had shifted. Where he had once felt dominance, he now felt uncertainty. Where he had mocked, he now faced respect, not through intimidation but through the undeniable reality of her control and composure. Every action, every decision, and every interaction emphasized that she had always been in command, even when he failed to recognize it. Friends, family, and even legal advisors commented on the striking difference. They noted how someone so quiet and seemingly ordinary could possess such remarkable influence. It was a story not just of wealth but of patience, integrity, and the quiet exercise of power. They began to understand that appearances are often misleading and that true authority does not need to be flaunted. As the proceedings continued, she maintained her routine, her calm, and her dignity. She moved through her days with grace, focused on her own life while allowing the legal and emotional realities to unfold naturally. She had always understood the value of patience, and she trusted that the truth would ultimately reveal itself in a way that required no dramatics. Her husband, finally confronting the extent of her power, began to change. He spoke with caution, measured his words, and recognized her knowledge and influence. The arrogance that had guided him for years diminished, replaced with a cautious respect. He realized that he had misjudged her entirely, and that his previous mockery had been both unjust and short-sighted. By the time this stage of the divorce reached its conclusion, the situation was unmistakable. She had retained control, demonstrated quiet strength, and managed the process with dignity and intelligence. Her husband had learned a painful lesson about assumptions, arrogance, and the danger of underestimating someone based on appearances. And she, through patience and careful management, had ensured that truth and fairness prevailed without unnecessary conflict or drama. She continued her life with the same calm confidence that had defined her from the beginning. She maintained her routines, nurtured her relationships, and moved forward without bitterness. Her strength was quiet, deliberate, and enduring. She had shown that true power does not require loud statements or aggressive action. It is found in patience, preparation, and the steady assurance of knowing one's own worth. The lesson was clear. Those who mock, dismiss, or underestimate others often discover too late the depth of the strength they have overlooked. The final stage of the divorce arrived with a sense of quiet inevitability. The papers had been signed, the legal procedures completed, and the outcomes determined. Her husband, once confident and mocking, now faced the consequences of underestimating the woman he had married. The arrogance that had defined his approach had been replaced with a careful, cautious respect, though he still carried the weight of his past mistakes. She moved through the process with grace, never seeking to humiliate or shame him. She had always understood that true strength does not require aggression or revenge. The facts spoke for themselves. Her wealth, her control, and her dignity were beyond dispute. She did not need to raise her voice or assert dominance. Every decision, every action, and every interaction reflected her quiet authority. Her husband attempted small gestures of apology and understanding. He spoke carefully, choosing words that acknowledged her knowledge, her rights, and her position. But some lessons cannot be erased by words alone. She listened politely, accepting civility, but she did not allow him to rewrite the past. Respect, she knew, is earned and maintained, not retroactively given after years of mockery. Friends and family observed the conclusion of the divorce with awe. They had witnessed a remarkable transformation in the dynamics between the two of them. The woman who had been dismissed, underestimated, and ridiculed had emerged as the one in control. The man who had believed himself untouchable had been forced to confront the reality of his misjudgment. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and the power of quiet confidence. She returned to her life with calm determination. The daily routines she had cherished continued to provide stability and peace. She focused on her work, her personal projects, and her relationships, moving forward without bitterness or resentment. Her quiet demeanor, once overlooked, now commanded respect in a way that was natural and unforced. People began to understand that her strength was not loud or ostentatious. It was steady, deliberate, and enduring. Her fortune remained fully under her control. The companies, investments, and trusts that had been carefully preserved by her parents continued to grow. She managed them thoughtfully, ensuring that every decision was strategic, ethical, and measured. Her husband had no claim to these assets, and the legal process had confirmed what she had always known. Her power was secure, yet she did not celebrate this as a victory over him. It was simply the natural outcome of careful preparation, intelligence, and patience. The contrast between her calm, dignified approach and her husband's previous arrogance became a lesson for everyone who knew them. It showed that appearances can be deceiving, that quiet strength can surpass loud confidence, and that true power is often invisible until revealed by circumstances. People began to reflect on their own assumptions and the ways they judge others based on superficial impressions. In her personal life, she found joy in the ordinary moments. She continued to read, walk, and enjoy music, appreciating the simple pleasures that had always sustained her. She spent time with friends who valued her for her character, her wisdom, and her integrity. These connections, built on mutual respect and understanding, became even more meaningful after the turbulent years of the divorce. She understood that wealth and influence are only meaningful when paired with character and compassion. Her husband, having faced the reality of his mistakes, began a slow process of self-reflection. He realized that his arrogance and assumptions had blinded him to her true abilities and contributions. He acknowledged, privately and reluctantly, that he had been wrong in dismissing her for so long. The realization was uncomfortable, humbling, and transformative. It forced him to confront the consequences of his actions and to consider the value of respect, patience, and understanding. Despite the tension and the lessons learned, she remained composed. She did not allow bitterness to enter her life. She understood that carrying resentment would only weigh her down, and that true strength comes from letting go of what cannot be changed and focusing on what can be controlled. Her calmness, even in the face of past mockery, was a reflection of her inner strength and wisdom. As the days turned into weeks and months, the world around her began to recognize her remarkable story. People admired her not only for her financial success but for the grace, patience, and intelligence with which she had navigated difficult circumstances. Her journey became an example of how dignity, preparation, and quiet confidence can lead to outcomes far beyond what is visible to the casual observer. She continued to live with the same integrity and self-awareness that had defined her life from the beginning. Every decision was thoughtful, every interaction deliberate, and every choice guided by a sense of purpose and understanding. She had not sought to prove herself to anyone, yet her life now stood as a testament to the power of quiet strength, careful planning, and patience. Her husband adjusted to the new reality with humility. He learned that control and power are not simply about appearances or loud statements. They are about understanding, patience, and respect for the people around you. He reflected on his own behavior, recognizing that the lessons he had learned were hard but necessary. The experience reshaped his perspective, forcing him to appreciate the value of insight and discretion. In her private moments, she reflected on the journey she had taken. She thought about the years of quiet observation, careful management, and patient waiting. She recognized that her choices had led to stability, security, and a sense of empowerment that no mockery or misunderstanding could diminish. She had maintained her dignity, her authority, and her calm, and in doing so, she had demonstrated a form of strength that is rare and enduring. Her story spread quietly among friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. It was not a tale of revenge or ostentation but of resilience, patience, and the ability to maintain composure in the face of misunderstanding. People were inspired by her ability to navigate complexity without losing her integrity, to remain calm in adversity, and to achieve outcomes that reflected careful planning rather than impulsive action. As the final legal documents were filed, she walked away from the process with her confidence intact. She had proven, without confrontation or aggression, that quiet strength and thoughtful strategy often surpass arrogance and impatience. She had maintained her dignity, secured her fortune, and preserved her self-respect. The woman who had once been mocked and underestimated now stood as a model of resilience, intelligence, and composure. Her husband, having faced the consequences of his underestimation, carried the lessons with him. He recognized the depth of her abilities and the wisdom she had demonstrated throughout the process. The experience reshaped his understanding of relationships, respect, and the unseen strength that people may carry. He learned, albeit the hard way, that mockery and arrogance often lead to humbling truths. In the days that followed, she focused on building her life forward. She invested her energy in projects, relationships, and pursuits that mattered to her. She embraced the lessons of patience, dignity, and quiet confidence, knowing that true influence does not require display but is demonstrated through thoughtful action, preparation, and self-assurance. Her story became a testament to the idea that appearances can be deceiving, that quiet strength often holds the most power, and that patience and integrity can overcome years of misunderstanding and mockery. It reminded everyone that true control and influence are earned through consistent, thoughtful actions rather than through arrogance or outward show. In the end, she walked away not only with her fortune but with her dignity, her confidence, and a deeper understanding of her own strength. She had navigated a challenging situation with grace, patience, and intelligence, proving that true power lies in quiet authority and thoughtful action. Her husband, her friends, and those who observed her journey learned invaluable lessons about humility, respect, and the underestimated strength of those who choose patience over conflict. The woman who had once been mocked for simplicity now stood as a symbol of wisdom, resilience, and the enduring value of quiet confidence. She had shown that dignity and intelligence, when combined with careful planning and patience, could overcome mockery, arrogance, and misunderstanding. She moved forward into her life with assurance, knowing that she had achieved not only financial security but a victory of character and self-respect that no one could take away.